Welcome back, all of you. Good to see you again. Nice. So this is what's going to happen in this very moment. What we're going to do is we're going to have about 20 minutes of questions for the speakers. We already collected some of them that you shoot out through the comment section, and we're going to try to give each speaker at least one or two. And then after that, if we have time, we're going to look at additional questions that you might have. You can just shoot it in the comments. And otherwise, we'll just find another way for you to communicate those. And yes, we're ready. So let's start with the number one question. This one is for Anna. Anna, Alexandre Circo asks, is : part already supported by Angular? Is there anything to enable it? Will ngDeep be removed? That's like 3 questions in one, but you can handle.
Okay, so as far as I know, and it's very hard talking in front of Steven here, but so please step in at any time. I feel like Angular has adopted all of the native CSS things, so I don't see how this would be a problem. I personally have not tried it using part in an Angular component. So I'm not sure, but I can definitely check it out and get back to you if you want to send me a DM on Twitter. And I think I'm pretty sure ngDeep is actually deprecated. So
I'll jump in and say it's deprecated because we like it was removed from the CSS spec, but we have no plans to remove it until the whole ecosystem is moved to something else. And so I would not worry about it being removed.
Sounds good. All good. So moving on, for Manfred Steyer, a question. Are micro frontends the same as micro apps?
Yeah, so I have the impression that both terms are used for the same thing, for a tiny thing which is part of a bigger system. Yeah, so I would say yes.
Cool, absolutely great. Next question is for Aaron. Aaron, wouldn't Angular Universal be an alternative to pre-render the content server side?
Yeah, so when you're doing pre-rendering, you can do Angular Universal or you can do Scully. Angular Universal is very fast compared to Scully. Scully is much more integratable to almost every single project, however. So if you have the time, Universal can be faster, but it is a much easier sell to get Scully into the project. But yeah, both will work for pre-rendering. Scully has a plugin ecosystem, which will make it easier versus with Universal, you'll be having to roll a lot of your own stuff for that stuff. But yeah.
Sounds good. Sounds good. All right. Now we have one question for Stephen. Bram asking, we see a lot of great new tools like Snowpack or Byte. Are these things on the radar at the Angular team? And is this something we can expect to see in the future?
We spend a lot of time watching the ecosystem, seeing new tools get built. But moving people to new tools is hard and slow because we have to make sure that the millions of Angular developers out there have an easy, smooth transition. So I'll say we are watching these things, and if we find ways that we can integrate them, we want to. But at the same time, we are only going to do that when it works for kind of everybody. And that's why we want part of our kind of vision for the future of Angular is that it's easy for you to use things like NGX Build Plus or tap into other tools or build your own builders so that you can say, hey, this part of Angular, let's just keep it as is with the opinionated stack from the Angular team, and then let me extend it with these parts of it. So we want people to be able to use tools that they care about, but we at the same time have a responsibility because one of the people's favorite things about Angular is our opinionation of they know that they can trust these things. They've been baked fully integrated into what we're doing. And they work out of the box. So I love to see new tools, and we watch all these tools. Like we spend probably a few hours every week talking about new tools that have come out and like what's cool about them, what's not cool about them, and how we could potentially use them. But then we're going to obviously move much slower than that to make sure that we're delivering top quality software.
Amazing. Sounds good. All right. Another question for Anna from Motiava. Is it straightforward to create custom elements from Angular? But what about the other way around? How is it possible to create custom elements or web components from Angular for an AngularJS directive, for example?
Okay, so from what I understand from the first question, we're being asked whether it's straightforward to basically implement web components into an Angular ecosystem. And this is very simple. You just have to import it, and then you need to make sure that in your module you have your schemas array, and you put custom elements. What is it again? Sorry, custom element schema, is it? And then
I guess, yeah.
Yeah, custom element schema. But if you do forget this, like I tend to, I know that the browser will shout at you, so no need to remember exactly what you need to do there. And how is it possible to create custom elements web components from an AngularJS directive? There isn't an official way to do this. There are workarounds, but I think that the best way is always to do it with Angular elements and the updated version, because it's what's mostly supportive.
Totally. Sounds good. Sounds good. Great. And if anybody again in the speaker panel want to chime in or say something, please just feel free to jump in. Sounds good. Moving on, Manfred. John Serna has a question. He's actually from Colombia. Hello, John. He has a question for you, Manfred. If a project is big, is it a good idea to start with micro frontends or implement them only when it becomes necessary?
Well, that's a good question. And I think it's really difficult to answer this question on that coarse-grained level. But in general, if you have several teams to coordinate, and if you feel a pain there, if it is painful to coordinate them, I would look into the micro frontend story. Because in this case, chances are high that the disadvantages of micro frontends are more or are smaller than the advantages. So you will perhaps benefit from it. But if it is just backend, if you just have one team, I would just start with a mono repository, something like NX, and make sure that one part of the system cannot be coupled to the other part. You know, NX has this thing called access restrictions, which allows this. And when you do this, you can easily switch to a micro frontend architecture a bit later, because nothing is intermingled with anything else. But if you don't do this, switching to a micro frontend solution later is quite difficult.
I see. Good point.
One of my favorite misconceptions right now about micro frontends is that you have to have a many repo situation. I've seen several companies where you put all of your micro frontends in a mono repository, because one of the biggest challenges with micro frontends is ensuring consistency across the different apps. And if you put them all in the same repo, you can build much better tooling to help assist with that and still have kind of all of the benefits in terms of deployment or independent deployability, small pieces.
Yep, sounds good. Stephen, for you, we have another question. What is the difference between Source Map Explorer and Webpack Bundle Analyzer?
Sure. So Webpack Bundle Analyzer executes based on source maps that are generated before our Cursor pass, which is a really technical answer to say, like, there's a step in our build pipeline that Webpack Bundle Analyzer is going to miss. And so the way that it maps the source is going to be wrong, and it's going to give you the wrong numbers for like how big things are in your production bundle. Source Map Explorer does it a little bit differently. So it uses those final source maps at the end. And so the mapping is more accurate.
Pretty clear. Sounds good. Let's go with a question for Aaron. The following question is from Juan Calderon. Angular does not allow trailing slash, and there's no clean solution for that. With Schooly, is there any way to mitigate that problem?
So not really. All Jamstack toolchains generate your app with that required ending /, right? The good thing is that most file servers like Nginx if you request a route without a slash at the end, it'll say, hey, it'll automatically redirect to that URL for you. So it'll automatically say, hey, let me send you over to that same thing with the ./ and you can get the index off that. So like a lot of the tooling exists to fix that for you. And I know that this is the same for Java servers, .NET ISS servers. So yeah, like a lot of it's in the tooling already, but there's currently actually, we just bumped an issue with the Angular team to maybe support trailing slashes. And Minko was super cordial. He said, I will talk about it, but I have no guarantee that it will get prioritized. So that's kind of the answer for that.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
And I will say, anytime folks have issues like this, yeah, we want to hear about them. Like we can't fix everything right away, but the more people are sharing with us their pain points, like Aaron bumping that bug, if that bugs you too, go find that issue in our GitHub and give it a thumbs up or add a comment, because we're paying attention to that. We're planning on spending a lot of time going through our issue tracker very, very shortly here.
I'll tweet it. So come find my tweet and you can go to the link and vote it.
Nice. Good to hear. Question for Manfred. If two micro frontend are using the same lib or library and mentioning it in shared array, will still load only once?
Yeah, totally. So if both applications mention the same dependency in the shared array, it will be shared also between those two micro frontends, not only between the shell and one micro frontend, but also between those two micro frontends.
Good, cool, to the point. Question for Stephen. Can you share any resources or best practices for gzipping production Angular apps?
I would say the best practice is let your hosting setup do it for you. So use a CDN like Firebase, like Heroku, Netlify, like any of these, like any good CDN is going to do content compression for you. If you are setting up, if you're rolling your own node server, for example, I think it's just like you import compress and then you call the app.compress or app.use compress. I think that's all you need to do. It's relatively easy.
Sounds good. Nice. Yeah, I agree. Question for Aaron again. Which routes are added to the assets/schoolyroutes.json when we do ng-run Scully?
So any route it can find gets added to the Scully JSON, to the Scully routes JSON. And the Scully routes JSON exists so that you can use the discovered routes in your Angular app to build something like a table of contents, right? Like if you have a series of markdown files and you don't really know what the other markdown files are inside of your markdown file, and unless you want to manually like build that out, it's tough to kind of build that. And so we let you build a table of contents component for your blog or for your website using the Scully routes JSON, and Scully provides you a Scully routes service that you can inject and consume, and you can see which ones are active, which ones are inactive. If you have a blog post that's not published, so published is false on it, then you can actually still see that if you want to, but it's ultimately not there in like just the available routes. So there's a lot going on with the Scully routes that make developing pre-rendered apps very, very powerful. So yeah.
Good. Manfred, another question for you. How do we share state between federated modules?
Oh yeah, that's a nice question, because on the one side, we need to share state when it comes to micro frontends, at least some state. On the other side, when sharing state, we are creating contracts between our micro frontends. And avoiding contracts is what this idea is about. So somehow it is a contradiction in itself. But one solution is to do it as little as possible, and to use very simple mechanisms like message passing. So what I would do is I would define a subject which allows me to pass some events around, And if other parts of the system are interested into those events, I would call them domain events, because it's not about I've clicked here or I moved the mouse there. It's more about someone booked a flight or someone bought a product, then other parts can react upon it. But don't assume that other parts have to react upon it. Perhaps no one is interested into it. Perhaps several other parts are interested into it. So messaging is here the key, and do it as less as possible to avoid coupling.
Super. Yeah, very clear answer. Thank you. Anna, there's a question from Thorsten Müller. Did someone get the link to the repo to check out the code? Apparently they are interested in the repository. Will you share this on Twitter later on?
Sure, I'll share my slides on Twitter. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Cool. I would like to, we have only 4 minutes left, so I would like to just take a moment to see if the speakers would like to say anything, state anything, share something, or do you want to continue with some questions for another 3 or 2 minutes? Sounds good.
If I could add, if there's any Scully questions that we're not answering, every Tuesday the Scully team has an office hours where you can come and join us live online, and we'll answer any question. We can actually talk to you specifically about your project and your code base and adding pre-rendering through Scully. So just go follow us on Twitter at Scully.io, and you can kind of get those updates and join us on that. That's all I wanted to add.
Nice, good one. So we'll do just the last 2 questions, and then we just move on to meet the team behind ngVikings to say a goodbye to the first part of the or the first day of the conference. And this question is for Stephen. Are there any tools that tells which libraries work well with Angular? For example, which ones support tree shaking or so?
Oh, that question hits me right in the heart, because we had a intern come in and we were building that exact tool and we didn't get it done. And I want that tool to exist so bad. I'll tweet out a link to the repository because if anyone wants to help us finish that would be amazing. Because like what I want is basically a curated list of Angular libraries where you see, okay, if I use this library, what does it add to my bundle size? Does it have accessibility? What version of Angular was it built with? Like, I want to have just this semantic layer on top of NPM where like you can actually make good decisions around libraries and tools in the Angular ecosystem. And we were close, but we didn't get there. So if anyone's interested in helping me with this project, I would love to collaborate.
Super, super, absolutely great. And the last question for Aaron. How far is it similar to app shell, and what advantages against server-side rendering?
So it's kind of different from app shell. It's not necessarily the same thing, but it's similar. Its advantages over server-side rendering, however, is, I mean, there's a lot of advantages server-side rendering has over Scully, but just to speak about the one Scully has over server-side rendering, you don't have to add a node server or a cluster of node servers to your production configuration. Imagine if you're a .NET shop and someone says, hey, let's add Angular Universal for server-side rendering. Well, now you've got to configure PM2 to run a multi-node cluster that can, relaunch servers when they die and stuff. And like, it gets pretty complex, and a lot of organizations won't allow you to add node into like a production configuration anyway. So like, it gets a bit political, but with Scully, it's only a build time step. So there's no production time step. And so it makes it a bit easier to get these things across the finish line. You can cache API calls, which is something that server-side rendering can't necessarily do. And then I think the biggest one, and Steven alluded to this, and I've tried to allude to it, is you're putting the stuff that you're pre-rendering on a CDN. And what that means, Juan, is your user who might be on the other side of this big blue spaceship, they don't have to come to your server to get that. They get to stay on their side of the blue spaceship and request it from the CDN that's on their side of the spaceship rather than come all the way to your side of the planet to get that. Does that make sense? And the speed that's afforded through that is like monumental, and it outweighs any any sort of optimization you could hope to gain through like lazy loading or any other sort of optimization, like getting these pre-rendered things will add more performance to your app than anything else you can do. And I'm speaking from experience, even with giant old AngularJS, jQuery plugin based, or whether it's the most latest Angular stuff. This type of structure using the Jamstack is the biggest performance advantage you can give to your users. And Steven called it perceived performance. I will call it the exact same thing. It is a massive perception of performance improvement on your app, and it's absolutely fantastic. So yeah,
amazing, nice, great potential there. All right, so we have reached the end of our panel. So I'd like to let each one of you to say goodbye, to thank the audience, to say any final words you'd like to share before we just bring the team of ngVikings. Who wants to start?
Just thank everyone for being with us on this journey. It's going to be better and better every day.
Absolutely.
I just say I love the Angular community. These are hard times. I love being with everybody at these types of events, and I'm really missing it. So I hope everyone's doing well and trying to stay positive in this weird time. Yeah, hearts for everybody.
Nice.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for having me. You know how much I love the Angular community, and especially ngVikings. It's a real honor to be here today. So thanks.
Super. Nice.
Yeah, I'm also saying thanks for all your effort and thanks for making ngVikings possible. For me, it is one of the major European conferences about Angular and one of the best community-driven conferences. So thanks for all your effort.